Because for all of my 55 years, the Conservative Party has been bitterly divided on the question of Europe, and in the last 3 years they have decided to inflict that internal division on the rest of the country. And that's largely, that's my 1 minute summary of where we find ourselves today, because essentially an issue which could not be resolved within the Conservative Party, about which there was, in my estimation, no real popular upsurge of demand for it to be expressed as an issue. You know, members that I've represented this area for 22 years in both the House of Commons and the Scottish Parliament. I did not have members of the public queuing up at my surgery demanding that we have a referendum on the European Union question. And of course, what we ended up with as a consequence of the referendum decision in Scotland was an overwhelming majority in favour of remaining within the United Kingdom, within the European Union. And what that has led to is a whole series of events which I think have some pretty profound implications for the people of Scotland and the way in which we take forward the political issues and the political dilemmas that we face. If I look back on the last 3 years since the EU referendum in June 2016, how I would roughly summarise the period is that the Remain vote of the people of Scotland has been comprehensively ignored by the United Kingdom government. The attempts to try to negotiate an approach to implementing Brexit, if we had to implement Brexit, which has essentially defined a very hard Brexit when any rational conclusion could have been arrived at by the creation of a much more manageable situation that would have led to much less disruption and damage to our economy and our society. That opportunity was essentially rejected by the United Kingdom government, by the red lines that they set out in this process. And the contents of the withdrawal agreement that have been the subject of such intense and conflicted debate over the course of the last few months have been defined essentially by the red lines that were put in place by the Prime Minister and the UK government. I could see how, and we argued as a government for this position where you could have maintenance of the membership of the single market and maintenance of membership of the customs union as two foundations of a way of handling and implementing Brexit as a consequence of the referendum vote. But both of those options, particularly the single market option, are rendered virtually impossible to implement by the red lines that were defined by the Prime Minister and the United Kingdom government, principally, I would have to say, because of an obsession that has swept the UK government, and I'm afraid to say large sections of the Labour Party as well, about concern over free movement of individuals. And I want to say a little bit more about free movement of individuals in the contribution that I make tonight. So we find ourselves in a situation where the democratically expressed views of the people of Scotland, which were about remaining within the European Union, have essentially been ignored by a UK government who have taken a set of decisions that have led to the putting to the House of Commons of essentially a hard Brexit option, which clearly does not command a majority within the House of Commons. And that's why we find ourselves in the democratic paralysis in which we are currently founded. So all of that, I think, requires us to look at the political situation that we face and take some pretty bold decisions as to how we respond to that. First opportunity that we have is in the European elections, the unscheduled European elections, 2 weeks tonight actually. And those elections are an opportunity for there to be a resounding message sent loud and clear to principally the Labour and Conservative parties about the importance of finding an approach to the Brexit issue which does not involve the cobbling together of a behind closed doors deal that essentially puts a hard Brexit deal through the House of Commons. And that's what's currently being negotiated in the streets of Whitehall as we speak, and will continue to be negotiated next week. Now, many people have, well, actually 2 people have concluded from the English local authority results last week that the comprehensive drubbing of the Conservative and the Labour parties is actually a mandate for getting on with delivering a hard Brexit. It's a kind of odd conclusion when the big winners out of the election last week were pro-Remain parties and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. And a response to this is then to go for a hard Brexit. It's a kind of odd conclusion for one to arrive at, but that's the conclusion that Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn appear to have arrived at as a consequence. But we have another opportunity on the 23rd of May to make sure that that message cannot be misunderstood, and that while they get a drubbing, it has to be, and obviously I would argue for a strong and emphatic SNP vote to demonstrate our commitment to continued membership of the European Union. So that's the first opportunity we have. The second is in the political dialogue that follows from that process, which I think has got to lead to whatever is concluded out of all of this process of negotiation being put back to the people in a referendum, whereby the people can decide whether this deal represents something they want to have or whether they want to remain in the European Union. And I think that's the only fair and reasonable proposition that can be brought together and argued for as a consequence of the process in which we are involved. And that's important because I think it's so clear that none of the options and approaches that have been brought forward have in any way commanded wide political support either within the country or even within the House of Commons. And when the democratic processes of the country fail, then I think the issue has got to be put to the public for the public to consider their view on this whole issue. Now, one of the questions that I raised in my contribution was around freedom of movement, and there does seem to be such a head of steam built up within the Conservative and Labour parties about the need to end free movement. Indeed, lots of language which has gone on about, celebrating the ending of free movement. And I can't think of something which, a stance, which is more alien to the needs and the requirements of our economy and our society today. When I look at Scotland today, Scotland's a very different country to the one that I grew up in. It's a much more diverse society. There are people from many different backgrounds who are now real participants and partners within our society, and they've come from all sorts of different parts of the world. And we, as a country, are the better for it. I say that unreservedly. There are organisations, businesses that in my constituency, there are institutions that I represent, there's institutions that I meet with on a constant basis in my government responsibilities, principally within our universities, who are what they are with their strength because of freedom of movement. Not as a bad thing, but as a good thing, which has led to their strengthening and the building up of those institutions. So the idea that somehow we should celebrate the ending of free movement is to me a disastrous concept. It has enhanced our society. And at a very practical economic level within Scotland, we need to have a growing population. Any country that wants to grow its economy has to have a growth in population. The two go hand in hand. And our domestic population in Scotland is not, and has for some time, not been growing as fast as it needs to grow to ensure that we are able to contribute to that necessary growth in our economy. So we need to have free movement of individuals to contribute to our economy. So whether it's on an economic level or on a social level about what our country looks like and feels like, and whether it feels like a welcoming place, which, I felt Scotland has been for all my days, we're about to be essentially ushered into an era where we are less willing to accommodate freedom of movement, and I find that something that is profoundly depressing as a concept, and as a concept to somehow have to put up with in our society today. Because freedom of movement has strengthened our economy, it has strengthened our society, and also it's opened up opportunities for our own people to go off to other places and to make their living and their lives with as much freedom as individuals have come from other countries to make a substantive contribution to our society. And there's a kind of bit of logic that I can't quite fathom out, that in my lifetime, it's gone from being difficult to engage with the European Union in my early days to now being super easy to engage with the European Union. And for my children, it's going to go from being super easy to engage with the European Union in their lives today to being more difficult to engage with the European Union in some period in the future. So, at every level, there's nothing that's happened in all of the last 3 years since the Brexit referendum, which has made me, for a moment, doubt the Remain stance that I took in 2016, and which I've felt for many, many years as being the way in which we should relate to the European Union. And I think the practical effect of all that has happened in the last 3 years, and the inability of the United Kingdom government to navigate a way through the Brexit debacle, which minimised or avoided economic damage to our country, demonstrates that this is the wrong thing to do. There is all sorts of footage of UK ministers dancing around, trying to avoid answering a question about whether the withdrawal agreement that the Prime Minister is currently trying to advance will lead inevitably to a reduction in the economic potential of the country. And all sorts of different formulations are found, but fundamentally that point cannot be escaped. The withdrawal agreement being proposed just now will lead to a diminution of the economic performance of our country. And I think people are entitled to make a judgment about that as to whether or not that's something they want to sign up to. But aside from these technical economic arguments, we have to face up to a question about how we want to relate to the European Union. I think we should continue to relate to the European Union as willing participants, as active partners, as active players in a European Union that has enriched our country and made our country the stronger for it. And at root, I think the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland need to be respected where they have not been respected in this process, and the way in which we use our votes in a couple of weeks' time, the way in which we argue for a people's vote on the European question, ways in which we can ensure that our democratic voice is heard loud and clear in this process. Thank you very much.
Normally, John and I are engaged in what you might call robust debate in the Scottish Parliament. We've always got some constructive criticism to provide for each other. But this evening, I am on my best behaviour. So committed to the European Union am I that I'm prepared to stand on the same platform as the dark side in order to make sure we make the case for the European Union. But I'm putting aside our differences this evening because it is so important. I was hurt on the 23rd of June in 2016. I have to say I was quite emotional. I felt as if things had changed fundamentally in our country. Of course, I would be concerned and anxious about some of the technical aspects of leaving the European Union, not having MEPs representing us in Europe. I would be concerned about the economic impacts, whether there were some technical aspects over the environment, being able to work together to deal with climate change, around about free movement of people that John has rightly highlighted. All of those issues I'd be concerned about. But the thing that really concerned me is what it said about the country that we had become. Were we a country that was outward looking, open, optimistic, positive about the future, willing to engage and work in partnership with our neighbours, or were we somehow turning in and believing that only we had the answers to our own future? I think working together with our partners, our neighbours, was not something that we wanted to do anymore. What did we view about people in other parts of the world? That's what concerned me most. That's why I was so upset on the morning after the referendum. And I still feel that. So of course, I'm deeply concerned about the fact that all Brexit options will damage our economy, jobs, opportunities, well-being, all of that will be damaged. Of course I'm concerned that we won't be able to deal with climate change as effectively by ourselves as we would be by trying to create momentum across the European Union. Of course I'm concerned that we're not, as part of a bigger trading bloc, to be able to deal with the big power blocks of America and China. Of course I'm concerned about all of those issues. But it's the kind of country that we've become is what I would be deeply concerned about. But there is something positive that has come out of the last 3 years. I know it's difficult to believe that there's something positive, but something tremendously positive has come, which is I think this country is more pro-European than it's ever been before. The fact that we can get 6 million people to sign a petition to say we should revoke Article 50 is tremendously positive. We can get so many people on the streets of London marching to say we want to stay in the European Union. Nobody used to fly the European flag before. Almost everybody does it. Now, there are almost as many European flags as there are saltires flying around these days. So it is great and it's positive that people feel so good about the merit. Sometimes you have to be on the verge of losing something before you really understand the value of it, and that certainly happened. The fact that you're out delivering leaflets on the European Union sounds like almost every week. It's tremendously positive that people will come to a meeting this evening and talk about the European Union. It's because it has become something that's part of our soul and our being, and that's why I think it's so positive that we've managed to get so many people on side. So, no government ever puts forward a proposition for something it doesn't want to happen. But that's exactly what this government has done. No government puts it forward. What they normally do is if they want to have a change, like John had a proposition on independence. He got a mandate in an election. He made sure he had a white paper, a detailed plan that was worked out, that was put before the people. And then the people knew exactly what they were voting for. Now, I was happy they rejected it, but they had the opportunity, the detail, the opportunity to make sure they understood exactly where it was going. Now, all we had in this referendum was slogans on the side of a bus. Many of them were inaccurate. In fact, we had 2 campaigns that said 2 completely different things. Some of them emphasised immigration, some of them emphasised taking back control. There were different messages and different propositions. But one thing was common between both campaigns. There was no detail. And it's not that people were ignorant. Of course they weren't ignorant. People knew what they were voting for in their terms, but everybody's terms were different. The fact that the Brexiteers now cannot agree amongst themselves now what Brexit actually means, how on earth were we supposed to know 3 years ago what it meant? Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't agree with Liam Fox, doesn't agree with Michael Gove. None of these people agree with each other. But apparently, we all knew exactly what we were voting for in the referendum on the 23rd of June in 2016. So it's pretty clear that what we do need now is a confirmatory referendum. Because it is so monumental, it is so substantial, and it is such a life-changing event that surely the British people should have that sign-off. That's the final say. That's the democratic thing to do. Now, I'm against Brexit, and of course I will be campaigning in any referendum to stop Brexit, and I make no bones about that. But what is really important is that everybody, whether they are confirmed in their view that Brexit is bad or that Brexit is good, they should be given that final say. If the government is so confident about the proposition, they should put it back to the British people. That, I believe, is fundamental in this. We would never, ever go through something that is so substantial without being absolutely sure that this is exactly what we want to do. Now, if you compare this process with the devolution process, the referendum in 1997, we had multiple parties that said they wanted devolution. And they put it in their manifestos. There was a common set of words that went in all the manifestos. It said, this is what we want to have. There was a constitutional convention. There was marches on the streets. There was a detailed blueprint for what we want the Scottish Parliament to look like. Then there was a parliamentary process, and the parliamentary process had a white paper. There was a consultation on the back of it. I remember sitting with Jim Wallace in the House of Commons going through the various amendments. There was extensive scrutiny before the public vote, and then it was confirmed in a public vote. So that was an organised, disciplined process, and I think 20 years on since the creation of the Scottish Parliament, we've had a good experience because society had bought into it. The Conservatives had even bought into it as well. They accepted the process, the will of the Scottish people. This was the settled will, and they bought into it. And that's the way to deliver constitutional change. This is the most chaotic way you could ever imagine. And that's why it's important, again, that we have that final say for the British people to sign it off, to make sure, we're absolutely sure, that this is the right thing to do. Now, John talked about free movement of people. I've got some key industries in North East Fife in my constituency, fruit and veg farms. I've got St Andrews University, one of the best in the world, attracts people from right across the globe. Importantly, 20% of its staff are from the European Union. About 10% of the students are from the European Union. About 20% of the grants that come for research is from the European Union. So the university is very much integrated into the European Union. But then you've also got the NHS, and there's something like 200 GPs in Scotland. 200 doctors in Scotland are from the EU. Then you've got the nurses. You've got a variety of public sector workers, skilled public sector workers who work with us in our public services to keep them alive. That is tremendously valuable. Then, of course, you've got the tourism industry. Again, big industry in this part of the world that relies on good workers who are making that industry a great success. If you look at the food and drink sector, which I talked about earlier on, the fruit and veg farms, they're hoping to double their turnover by 2030. That will not be possible if we do not have a good flow of workers. There are not enough Scottish workers to feed that industry, to let it grow. So that's a practical example of where we are potentially damaging an industry that's tremendously successful, alongside the universities, alongside the NHS, alongside many public services. We should not be causing this damage to ourselves. That's another reason why we need to turn back. And then there's the uncertainty itself. Now, there's a business, again, in my constituency, who told me privately, they don't want to make a big fuss about it, but they told me privately that their customers in Europe are already making decisions every day about where to place their orders. And because they don't know what the relationship will be with Britain, they're looking in Europe for a more stable relationship with a new client. And that means, and of course those businesses have said, look, we'll come back to you later on once you've made up your mind what you're doing on Brexit, and we might be able to do a deal. We might be able to work together. Those people won't come back. There's no way that once they've got a good relationship with new businesses in Europe, they'll be gone. So this extended period of uncertainty is directly causing us damage now, and that's before we even get anywhere near Brexit. So you can imagine if we had that really hard Brexit, the Brexit that's going to damage our economy, then of course we're going to have long-term consequences for our country. So that's why I'm deeply anxious about this whole period. I think we're causing ourselves damage that we should not be causing ourselves. Finally, I want to say one thing. There are some people who try and ascribe all sorts of motives for people who voted for Brexit. A lot of my friends voted for Brexit. A lot of family members voted for Brexit. It was a perfectly honourable position to do it. And I think we should respect people who voted for Brexit. It's really important to understand their motivation. It wasn't all about immigration. They're not racist people. They were concerned about the changing world around them. Now, I happen to believe they chose the wrong target. They blamed the European Union for all the ills of the world. Now, remember, there are 1 million people in Scotland who voted for Brexit. Good, decent people. If we're going to win this referendum, we need to engage with those people. We need to listen and understand why they feel left behind. And they do feel left behind. It's partly a hangover from the recession, that they feel as if they have not had a fair crack at the whip. So we need to understand the motivations. I don't know if anybody watched the Channel 4 documentary. It had Benedict Cumberbatch in it. It was about Brexit. And there was a moment in that drama where they replayed the focus group that the Remain campaign in the referendum did. And there was one lady in it, and she blew up halfway through. And she said, I'm fed up with being told what to think and what to do. I'm fed up with the fact that I don't have an opportunity in life. I don't have a job. I don't have a good school in my community. I feel really upset about this. And what I want to do now is I want to take back control of my life. So the slogan, Take Back Control, was very smart. It tapped into those anxieties, those fears, those concerns, that dissatisfaction about their life. So what we need to understand, and it's a really important job for us, we cannot push these people away. We need to understand what concerns they've got and make sure we channel it in a positive way. But that woman in that focus group, those people who feel left behind, those people who feel they want to take back control, are exactly the people who will be damaged by Brexit. They will be hit hard. And that's why it's important for us to stand up, no matter how difficult it is, and say, please, let's talk, let's understand, let's try and deal with the concerns and the anxieties that you've got. If we don't, if we divide our society further, and there is a hell of a lot of division in our society through Brexit, then we're just going to make it worse. So my plea is, let's reach out, let's talk to them, let's listen, let's understand, and let's give them hope. Thank you very much.
Happy Europe Day, everybody. I think that every day now that we stay in the European Union and that we defend our rights as European citizens is a great cause for celebration. Little things. I got my driving license through the other day. It's got a European Union flag on it. I got my passport through the other day. I'm renewing my passport at the moment. It says European Union at the top. I found my European health card the other day, which I'm going to use this summer to visit Europe again. Again, protections for me, protections for my family. So, we've got to celebrate these victories. And I think, I'm probably like so many people out there, I just took my European Union citizenship for granted. And then 3 years ago, everything changed. So, we need to continue to build on this. And I think for me, voting in this European Union election is going to be so important. And I want my children with me as well. I'm going to take my children into the ballot box. And hopefully it won't be the last time that they come and vote in the European Union election. Hopefully it will be just the start for them. But we've got to protect our rights. We've got to protect their future as well. I find myself doing sort of funny things now. I saw many of you at the European March that we had in Perth last year. Fantastic sunny day. And I think there was a stall and you were handing out little copies of the Lisbon Treaty, little postage stamp copies. And I've been carrying them around actually and reading them. And I got into a discussion with some of the climate strikers at one of the events in Edinburgh recently. And I was talking to one of the young people about, look, there are politicians who will dismiss your views about climate change in the future. But do you know what? Here in this document, your rights are enshrined. That treaty tells us that we have to listen to young people. We have to act on their concerns. And we also have to protect our environment for future generations as well. And this is, these aren't just words. These are written into the laws of the European Union. These are our rights as European Union citizens. was the first time that Climate Strike had actually sort of realised that, that your rights, your voice is embedded within our laws within Europe. So it's important that we build on that. We don't take that for granted. We take that message onto the streets, round the doorsteps as well, about the things that we do take for granted and how we need to protect them. Now, I mean, I'd sort of Googled a little bit about Europe Day, because I wondered sort of what the pivotal moment was. And I was interested to read about the speech that Schuman gave, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, back in the 1950s. And, at a time when there was great uncertainty in Europe, where we had the Cold War, where countries were struggling to rebuild after the Second World War. And of course, that original founding vision of the European Union was initially about a community based on trade, based on peace, but it was based actually around the coal and the steel industries. It was about creating a free trade community around coal and around steel. And it made me think about the projects the European Union is working on now, nearly 70 years later. We're at a point now where I think the European Union will set a target for the entire continent to be net zero emissions by 2050, a hugely ambitious target. It's going to have to draw together nations that are starting from very different starting points in terms of tackling the climate emergency. And for me, that's the project for this century. This is why we need the European Union, because to bring about the huge transformational changes that are going to be needed to tackle climate change, we need to be working together. We need the ability of the European Investment Bank to invest in the infrastructure and the business and the innovation and the jobs of tomorrow. We need the incredible research capability that we have across Europe in institutions in Scotland and Norway and France and Germany and everywhere working together, coming up with the new solutions that we desperately need to tackle climate change. We need that strong drive around innovation. If we're not in the European Union, then we're simply going to lose that. I'm very proud as a Green to have come from a European political movement. I think possibly perhaps not the SNP, although the SNP now does sit with the Greens in the European Parliament, but certainly we come from strong traditions within Europe. My own party was formed 40 years ago at a time when Europe was forming itself, the European Union was forming itself. And all of our member parties are in the European Green Party. And for me, the awakening of politics was the 1989 European Union election. I think it was one of the few times when we beat the Liberal Democrats in that case. But for me, it was about those values around human rights, around the environment, around peace. Europe's been our biggest, most successful world peace project. And it was that root of European progress that got me first into politics. And when I look at what's been achieved over the last 40 years, the progress that the European Union has made in areas of environmental policy, of protection for workers, things, again, that we take for granted, it's important that we don't lose that. So I want to just mention very briefly about one area where I feel that, we've got this absurdity with Brexit, and that's in terms of chemicals regulation. Now, Greens and others have fought very, very hard in the European Union for better regulation of chemicals. And chemicals are hugely important. I mean, just about this entire room is built on the trade and the regulation of chemicals. The seats we sit in, the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, the medicines that keep us healthy. So the European policy on that is hugely important, not just for trade and for commerce, but to keep us healthy and to keep us safe as well. Yet what's happening at the moment is that whole framework of regulation is being dismantled. And the Scottish Parliament is now being asked for its view on a completely separate form of regulation which tries to mirror what we've already built up in the European Union, the REACH regulations. And it's absolutely absurd. These regulations took 10 years to develop. There was a huge amount of testing of chemicals to make sure that they were safe. Supply chains were built up between nations, between major companies working together. Jobs were built up on that basis as well. And now all of that's going to go, and the Westminster government wants to set up an entirely new system, a system that may require repeat animal testing on chemicals. Unacceptable. Just an utter and complete waste of time. But these are the kind of absurdities that we're finding with Brexit now, almost on a daily basis. Instruments coming, new laws having to come from Westminster the whole time to patch up the chaos that's being created by this utterly illogical decision. Why would we go and want to test on animals again when we know that products are safe? We have to do it because we're setting up a completely new system. Really absurd stuff. So there's a lot of, technical reasons and trade reasons and policy reasons why we need to stay in the European Union. But I think the real voices that have been lost in this whole debate, and this has troubled me, have been the voices of those people who are European Union citizens who've come to Scotland to make their homes here and to live their lives here. And because of that, I really wanted a couple of months ago to host an event that reached out to those European Union citizens in Stirling and brought them into a space where they could share their experiences. And we hosted this a few weeks ago now with Bruce Crawford, and Scottish Government Minister Ben McPherson came along as well. And it's a hugely powerful event because we wanted to understand how people felt and what European Union citizens needed to support them, to ensure that they could stay as citizens in Scotland, that they work here, that they raise their families here, they feel welcome here. And I have to say it was an incredibly moving event in the end. We had about 60 people come along. There was a child of 1 month old, her parents, a French and German couple, dear friends of mine came along with their new baby. We had pensioners there. One pensioner had lived in Scotland for 40 years, a German lady. And what was clear is that the whole settled status scheme that now European Union citizens are having to apply for to remain in this country has made people feel deeply unsettled and deeply unwelcome. And I think we were quite taken aback by what's happening. And in fact, some people, including a number of Germans that were there, saying this makes them feel like they're being taken back to darker times in Europe's history. There was a Slovenian teenager there from Stirling. She lived most of her life in Stirling. She had a better Scots accent than I'll ever have, I'll tell you that. But she was telling us how she's having to work through the settled status scheme. She's having to try and apply to be a citizen of a country where she's lived most of her life. And because her family's moved around a lot and they've rented accommodation, she has to provide evidence of everywhere that she's lived over the last 5 years. And she can't do it. She can't do it because she was a child for some of that time and her parents don't have full records. But these are the hoops that people are having to go through to remain in this country. And, I just find it absolutely incredible. And what I would say is that most people at that event felt very welcome in Stirling. The communities that they lived in feel very welcome and very supportive. But there are also people who note a creeping change in the way that they're looked at and scrutinised by some people in our society. There were many people there who said that they feel more self-conscious of the way that they speak, that they feel that they're being asked questions now which previously they would have, before Brexit, never been asked. There's a Polish interpreter there who said that now she has people regularly asking her, do you send money home? So we have to work hard to support people, and we have to listen to people. And we heard some wonderful things that EU citizens are doing themselves as well. There's another Polish lady who organises every Christmas Eve a celebration for everybody in her community. They have a traditional Polish Christmas. And they invite everybody around. And that's wonderful. And she actually lives down the road from me, and I didn't know about it. So I know what the Ruskell family are doing next Christmas. But it's building these links. It's building these supportive networks in our communities. It's so important. Yeah, it's about the policy. It's about regulation and everything else. These are the things that keep us safe and protect us and enable free trade and jobs and innovation and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's also about people. It's about our friends and our neighbours and people who are already losing. And we've got to fight for all of our rights. Their rights, our rights. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And that's what the rest of us are going to do as well.
My name is Lesley Stark. I'm a reader in cancer cell biology at the University of Edinburgh, based basically on the Western General Hospital campus at the Institute of Genetics and Molecular Medicine. First of all, I'd like to thank Susanna for inviting me to speak tonight. It is an honour to be sharing a stage with such experienced politicians and speakers. I'm not very used to doing this kind of thing. I'm more used to speaking at scientific conferences and where I have slides to help me, so bear with me. So yes, what I think Susanna has asked me to talk about is why I am passionate about staying in the EU, and I'm very passionate about staying in the EU for both professional and personal reasons. So as a scientist, being part of the EU is absolutely essential. Freedom of movement and European funding has allowed large collaborative networks to be formed all over the EU, which have really allowed the research and development to thrive. It's allowed major breakthroughs in a lot of scientific and engineering and research development. So some of the breakthroughs, or some of the things that the European Union funding and collaborative networks have allowed, are, for example, the black hole that was on the news the other day, that was funded by European funding, partly the telescope that took those images, and the scientists were from European collaborations, and out was Europe as well, but part of the European collaboration. The Large Hadron Collider, which was built by over 10,000 scientists from all over Europe, and has allowed us to prove the presence of the Higgs boson and particles, and that was a very UK-based project. In terms of cancer research, which is the area that I'm interested in, things like immunotherapies have come on sort of leaps and bounds in the last 10 years through collaborative research with European networks, and also through the collaboration in clinical trials. So without being part, I mean, people in science will say, and I was reading the Royal Society's documents about the leaving of the EU and Brexit before I came here, and they're saying, well, we need a deal that will allow us to basically continue doing this. Which, yes, you might have some of the withdrawal agreement may allow us to do some of this, but it will not be as easy. So we do not want to have to leave leave the collaborations, because for us to be part of that funding, we'll have to apply for separate. We won't be allowed to be involved like everybody else in the EU. We'll have to apply for separate funding streams, etc., and it makes it difficult for other people in the EU to have us on their funding, and that's happening already. So these collaborative projects in the EU are stopping asking people from the UK, because it actually makes it more difficult, and they don't know what's going to happen going forward. So in terms of these collaborative projects, we really do need the EU, and it's been highly beneficial. In terms of the people, I mean, people have spoken a lot about freedom of movement, and that is really, really important for science. 1 in 6 of UK researchers are from the EU, and it's actually higher in Scotland. I think Willie Rennie said 20% in St Andrews, so it's actually 1 in 5 in Scotland of researchers are from other EU countries. These people bring so much to the research environment. They actually upskill, they bring skills that we don't have, they upskill our own workers, they bring funding from other places, they allow the collaborations to happen, so they bring connections with their institutes in other areas of Europe. And also, like other people have said, there are our colleagues and families, so it's not just about statistics. These people are real people, they bring culture, they bring friendship, and I think that they are leaving. I mean, I spoke to a girl the other day, she said she'd been here for 10 years, and I said, oh, what are you doing? She said, oh, I'm leaving. I've got a PhD in Sweden. And I said, why? She said, I'm not staying here because of Brexit. Another researcher I know left 2 years ago. He, again, the same thing from Holland. He said, oh, I'm not staying here because of Brexit. And the thing is that people will say, I know that they might get visas, you know, that the level of money that scientists get would probably allow most of them, not all, like young researchers actually don't come within the 30,000 threshold that they're talking about. So people that have just finished their PhD would not come within that. And so, but, you know, even if they did get visas, why would they want to come here? You know, people will not come here because it's not attractive. It would be difficult for them to move from here to back to their home country, etc., etc. And so people are leaving and people will not come. And this is going to be exceptionally detrimental to science in the UK and to science in Europe as well, because, again, if we all collaborate, we make more headway in all areas of research. And in terms of funding, the European Union provide billions of pounds of funding to us. So the Horizon 2020 programme, which is the programme that has run from 2013 and it'll run to 2020, has 80 billion pounds of funding. And 15% of that funding has come to the UK. And I know I've spoken to lots of people. I stand on the streets of Kinross with Susanna, trying to persuade people that we should stay in the European Union. And people say, oh, but we give them that money, we'll get that money back. Or, you know, other countries are paying, you know, they get more money than we do. We give all this money and we don't get it. Well, in the last Framework 7, which was the previous European funding network, there was the UK came second to Germany out of all the funding. So if people say that we don't get what we put in, we're getting more than we put in. And I have a very recent personal experience of this, and actually I've been saying this to people on the street, and actually they do, you know, people just don't know what the European Union do actually, which is a big problem, and especially in terms of science. So I have been reviewing the advanced research grants for the European Union. So this is the highest level of grants that they give out to individual groups. They obviously give out huge collaborative grants, and these are the highest level that they give to individual groups. So they generally fund maybe about 10 people, and they're worth billions. So I got a list of all the people that had been funded back, and out of all the ones that were given in the area that I was interested in, there's about 27 went to France, about 27 went to Germany, and 48 came to the UK. And that was just in the last round. So people say we're not getting, when I say that to people, they go, oh, but we don't know that. So it's like, you know, put that on a poster or whatever, that we're getting far more back in terms of science. And, you know, again, it's not just statistics. That's like, you know, hundreds of jobs being created, which will create more jobs and more jobs and more jobs. But again, I know that somebody had just come, one of our directors had just come back from a meeting of the European Research Council, and they don't have any representatives from the UK on the next, it's called Horizon Europe, which is the next 7-year round of funding, and there's no UK representatives. Which just shows you that they've moved on already, and we're going to be left standing, twiddling our thumbs with no money and nobody coming here. So, I mean, out of all of that, you can see that we really, like, science really, really does need the UK. And I think that we really have to start trying to promote what Europe does a bit more. I think that's one of the problems, that the people on the street actually, I mean, I only know my own field, and I'm sure this is the same in a lot of other areas as well. So we need to start telling people really what the EU is doing. And a lot of the talk has been quite negative about whether we leave or whether we stay. And I think that that's going to be a bit detrimental going forward for another referendum, because to be able to convince the people that wanted to leave the last time, we have to start telling people what the EU actually does. And, you know, to be honest, a lot of the things that I've looked into since I started this, I didn't know myself that they did. So I think that the average, and, you know, the BBC isn't going to tell anybody, is it? So yes. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is my personal reasons for wanting to stay in the EU. My son, who is now 26, we lived in Auchtermuchty. And when he was 19, he decided that he'd had enough of living in a small village and went to stay with a relative who was about the same age in Hamburg and never came back. So he now lives he met an Argentinian girl in in Hamburg. They went to live in Argentina for a bit, got married, and then they came back and lived in Berlin, and they now have a son. So that was about 5 years ago that all that happened, and they've lived there for 5 years. And so he has had the benefits of just being able to go, yes, I'm fed up here, I'll just go and see what's out there somewhere else. And not only does he have a wife and child in Berlin, he actually has a business now. He's an events manager, techno person, not quite sure, but organises techno events. And he's doing it not just in Berlin now, but he's got some in Paris, some in Poland, and different places. And again, because Berlin's very central, he can just go, I'll just go to here, I'll just go to there, and they can do what they like. And, and as soon as I believe we still won't leave the European Union, I'm very hopeful, but because as soon as we leave, he has been told in Berlin, in Germany, that everybody will be able to, stay and settle, but they won't be able to go to other countries. So their freedom of movement, even though they're there, will be stopped. But the other thing is we have a daughter, this is my partner who's sitting here, we have a daughter who's just turned 17. And if we leave for Europe, she will not have the same opportunities as her brother, which to me seems really, really unfair. And I've actually written to our MP in Kinross quite a few times about that particular, and he's not got back. And I told him to go to the school. I'm trying him. I said, why don't you go to the school and explain to people that you're removing their freedom of movement from them and they won't be able to travel? Because nobody believes it will happen. Everybody's like, yeah, but there'll be Erasmus grants and stuff. But the problem with Erasmus grants, and I know working at the university, is that they only go to a certain skill level of people. So it's really, really discriminatory that only, some people will get to travel, some people won't. And I just do not think that is fair at all. So I'll finish there, but that is my personal and professional reasons that I think we should all be fighting very hard to stay in the EU. Thank you.
Completely objectively. We'll all make our own arguments. It's probably, if you'll forgive me, it's probably not the environment for us to put forward. You'll see it through the leaflets and the debates on the TV as to why we each support our own party in putting that forward. But there is a concern that Nigel Farage has come from nothing to leading the opinion polls across the UK, and that if he manages to get people rallied behind him, that could send the opposite message of what we want. So it is important that you do make sure that, first of all, people turn out, and you yourselves are doing a good job at motivating people to register, but also to turn out to vote. So that's really important. But it's also that we make the positive case for Europe, that we actually are all out there arguing as to why there is a real value in the European Union. But I probably won't. I could give you 100 reasons why you should vote for me. I'm sure John could only come up with one, so it'd be unfair to have that for reason.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think you need to make the judgment of which political party best suits your wider views. As long as it's a Remain party, then great. I mean, the thing to bear in mind is that it's not a completely fair voting system, but it is a fairer voting system. So 6 seats going to Europe. No party on this platform can hoover up all of those 6 seats. So there will be an element of proportionality within that. And there are certainly 2 parties that are close to getting an MEP last time, ourselves and the Liberal Democrats, but the SNP were also close to electing 3rd as well. So, that's the situation that we're in. We need to put forward a positive case. Hopefully that will happen within the short time that we've got left between now and the election day. But I think getting out there and motivating people to vote is important. The worst that can happen is that there's a low turnout, and the only people who come out to vote are the tiny proportion of people in Scotland that support the Brexit Party. So
And in a way, that's kind of a little bit about what happened last time. Mr. Coburn got elected. So we need to drive our voters out. And of course, we'll try and get votes from each other, but ultimately, we need to drive our voters out, the people that believe and agree with the SNP, Lib Dems and others. So we've got to make that positive message. But yeah, the work you're doing to get people out is really, really important. And door knocking as well, and street stalls and the whole thing. We just need to engage.
Okay. I think my advice is just vote for who you've got confidence in and whose message you support. I think I think political parties, but I'm afraid on this occasion, Willie, I have to say you. So that'd be my advice. But I think I agree very much with Mark that there is a danger in this European election that those who wish to make a point about Brexit not happening have a channel by which they can make that expressly clear, and that's the Brexit Party. I suspect the UKIP thing is kind of morphed into the Brexit Party thing. So there is a channel very actively that can make that point. The only way to deal with that is to make sure there is a stronger performance on the other side of the argument. And that involves motivation of voters, it involves energising the campaign, because I think there will be an energy behind the Brexit Party message, which we have to be very alert.
I actually I don't think this goes violent. I think there are a small number of people who are particularly abusive. Some might be violent. But generally, this country doesn't do that. And I don't think it will happen. What I think the biggest danger is that they just disengage. They will be angry, and they might just not bother voting ever again. There was a man the other day knocking on his door, and he just shrugged his shoulder and said, well, why do I bother? And I think that's more likely the reaction. I think that's just as damaging in some ways, because I want them to engage in the political system. So I am worried about that. But I do worry generally about engagement in politics and the belief in the system. So it won't be easy. I just think the alternative is so much worse that I think we've got to go through that process. But we can't have it that politicians overrule it. It's got to be put back to the people for them to decide what to do. So it would be wrong just to have revocation. There's actually got to be that people's vote, so the people can decide whether they want to go ahead with it. But I actually have, I suppose what we do is the way that we conduct debate has got to be, have that tone that is right, so that we can try and lead that way, so that we don't give any kind of encouragement to those aggressive voices on the other side, but we just need to keep it measured and work really hard, as I was saying earlier on, about listening and understanding why people went that way. And the Crail Guild, Church Guild, came to see me in Parliament today, and it was quite striking that a lot of those I would have put down as accepting Remainers before. There were people who maybe voted Remain but wanted to accept the result and just get on with it. Those people, I detect, have moved back again. Because it has been so painful, it's gone on for so long, and they've now really understood what all the benefits, including what we've all talked about this evening, are. I think those accepting Remainers have moved back again and are actually much more willing to consider a people's vote, although they do understand the concerns that come with it. But I actually think there has been an awful lot of shifting and churning of the vote over the period, and I think it will shift again as the debate goes on, and I don't think this Brexit thing is going to be solved anytime soon. I think it's going to go on for a long time. So we will see even more change, but it's even more important then to have the tone right and you listen carefully.
Can I ask you a question? Because the thing is that we fight really hard, and I've been with people in Edinburgh who are fighting really hard, but to keep Remain and to get people to vote. But mostly Scotland is a Remain country. We voted Remain, and the people in Edinburgh, especially, it's a very strong Remain area, but most areas are. So sometimes I feel like, are we just wasting our time? Because we don't get listened to at all. And I know, obviously, what the other answer is, but we're not getting listened to. So we could vote. We did vote Remain. are we just handing out leaflets completely pointlessly here? Because whatever is going to, I don't know, what's your answer? Is it, yeah.
I'm sort of going on this, but I meet Brexiteers every day, and I'm knocking on doors, I meet them all the time. There are 1 million of them in Scotland. There's a huge amount of work.
Yeah, but there's
to be
also
done.
a lot more. There's also in the vote. There's a lot more.
Well,
There is
there
work
was,
to be
but
done.
there's a huge amount of work. I mean, I've not spoken to the million Brexiteers, and I won't stop until I've spoken to the million Brexiteers until we can try and get
So you
them back.
think
So there's a huge task to be done.
But we could just get our percentage much higher. But it doesn't. If should we all go? We could get our percentage to 80% of Scotland. Our vote remain, and then everywhere in England votes leave, and we're just stuck.
But there are people like you right across the country.
In a sense, that's, I think, part of the difficulty of the issue that the First Minister and Willie have debated on numerous occasions at First Minister's Question Time, which is, and this is it's a risk in a rerun the referendum that we have another referendum and we get the same result, that Scotland votes decisively to remain and our votes are outpolled by the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, I have a political answer to that, which is about protecting Scotland's membership of the European Union through independence, and that's why I think that is a logical and rational choice for the people of Scotland to make. But there is a risk, and there's no guarantees coming from a second EU referendum in the fashion that it's been constructed. But I think, to answer the lady's question, I think part of because this process has been so spectacularly mishandled in the aftermath of June the 26th, 2016, not necessarily as a consequence of the result in June 2016, but the spectacular mishandling of this in the aftermath, and the inability of the UK government to create any form of approach which brought people in any way to a point of agreement about how to take this forward. We've had fracture on top of fracture. There has to be, in my view, some further process that tries to take the issue out of the House of Commons, where I think current indications would say to me it can't be resolved, and engage the public in that wider dialogue about how it might be.
I mean, I think the point that Willie and others have raised about disenfranchisement is hugely important because, in the aftermath of the referendum, I was curious to find out what politics was like a little bit in the northeast and northwest of England that both voted strongly to leave. And I started having a quick look at some of the local papers and blog sites, and it's frightening. It's frightening what a lack of democracy and a lack of engagement from communities in democratic process has resulted in those communities. And, in a way, I feel very sorry for them that they haven't had the advantages that we've had through the Scottish Parliament over the last 20 years that have really brought decision-making and engagement much closer to the people. We had a respectful but heartfelt independence referendum campaign with, I think, a lot of not in every quarter, but a lot of honesty in the way that politicians approached that campaign and brought their arguments to bear, and a huge amount of engagement with people. And yet we haven't seen that in parts of England that I think voted for Brexit. And it's really important that we ensure that whatever happens, that those people who are more likely to be disenfranchised because of economic poverty and disadvantage, we continue to engage them. And what I did see in Stirling during the European referendum is I saw the Brexiteers target low-income deprived communities, ex-coal mining communities in the Stirling area, ignoring the rest of Stirling, but going in specifically where there's poverty and disadvantage and knocking on the doors time after time after time to tell people that the European Union was taking money off them, when actually it was investing in their communities and opportunities. And they did it in a very targeted, very precise way. Yeah, we still got 65%, I think, remain in Stirling. But do you know what? They did actually grow the Leave vote as a result of that. And it was striking the difference in communities. So they're exploiting disadvantage, exploiting disenfranchisement. And we've got to be wary of that because we've seen that in the last century where that goes.
No. I actually looked up their document. I found their document just before I came here, and all it said was, well, the bit that I read, we're going to have a deep and passionate relationship, not deep and passionate, deep and special relationship, and that's going to solve everything. So, no, there's nothing that will replace what we have. So, yeah.
I think Pete's been very supportive of people's vote. Well, I think he's, if you examine his voting record, I think he's voted consistently to support a pro-Remain position and to avoid Brexit, which is what he's endeavouring to do. He's opposing Brexit and trying to ensure that Brexit is.
In some ways, that you'll always get a hardcore that it's not that you ignore or dismiss, but there's others who are probably worth investing a little bit more time in to talk them through the arguments and to listen to understand their concerns. What I tend to do, and I'm sure John does exactly the same thing, when you come across somebody who's got an issue, they're angry about something, they've voted for Brexit, you help them out with their core business, with their core issues. You know, if they've got a problem with their housing and they feel as if they're dissatisfied, you help them out with that. If they've got a problem with their employer who's not treating them particularly well, you help them out with that. That's the privileged position that we get. And I can break them down and talk to them and get them to open their ears. And that happens quite a lot. Because they are feeling left behind. The others who are hardcore, they will just stick where they are. And then in terms of arguments, it is actually spending more time actually listening to what they say, rather than necessarily putting across all the valid arguments that they've got. You know, asking them the appropriate questions at the right time. And often they come to the conclusion themselves that actually what really is the benefit of working with your neighbours in a partnership is a good thing. So that's the way I tend to do it. You know, we've got particular powers that we can use to try and help people, but you in the streets, actually, it's about just sitting and listening. If they're angry at you, let them just unleash it and let them go, but continue to listen and ask the questions. That's the most important thing. Show that you're interested, and you might get even more. And I'm sure you are. I'm sure that's your stuff.
I don't think it helps to take the view that all of the people that voted Leave are doing so for the same motivation or from the same perspective. Because like any political movement, there'll be a variety of different shades of opinion and motivation within that. There will be a group of people within that who are, it doesn't matter what you say, they fundamentally do not agree with the concept of a European Union, and that will be driven by concerns about a European superstate, about the need for the United Kingdom to be an independent, self-governing country, with all that goes with that kind of historical view of believing there's no interdependencies in countries. That's one group of people. There'll be another group of people who are motivated by the question of immigration and believing that our country has changed fundamentally in a fashion that they don't like. And we have to be honest about this. And in my view, that there is only one way to deal with that, and that's to put an alternative perspective, because I fundamentally believe that the country I live in today is a better and a more cohesive country today because of immigration and freedom of movement. And there'll be a third group of people who, I think Mark talked a wee bit about this, which is his point about the consequences of a lack of political engagement, of feeling as if the system has totally and utterly ignored you and taken you for granted for many years. And I think there's a lot of folk, particularly in England, that feel like that because English politics has completely and utterly passed by many people for many years. I think it's different in Scotland because we've had intensely contested politics for years, really contested politics. and the independence referendum in 2014 was an intensely contested, in my view, well contested, emotionally and intelligently contested amongst the people of our country. It didn't disengage people, it engaged them. 97% registration, 85% turnout. That, I think, created a different mood in Scotland compared to a lot of what exists in England, where basically people were viewed as total lobby fodder in their votes and were not in any way paid any attention to by a process of economic and social change that was not, in which they were not necessarily engaged in any way, shape or form. And that allowed a frankly dishonest argument to prevail, where you have parts of the country which have significantly benefited from the presence, and this is where logic departs, because parts of the country where European activities and initiatives have created much better outcomes for people, but which the European Union gets absolutely zero credit for. One of the things I'm most proud about in Scotland is that across all parties, we've generally gone around saying the European Union has actually been a pretty good thing for us. Whether it's been about strategic infrastructure projects, or opportunities for our universities to thrive, or opportunities for our students and young people to go to different parts of the country, we've generally been the political leadership of Scotland has generally said, this has been a good thing.